Welcome into another edition of our advancement interview series. We've been so fortunate over the last couple of weeks to talk to a lot of the prominent and just incredible people at Baylor University, and today is more of the same. I'm Ryan Boyd, of course, Director of Regional Alumni Engagement at Baylor and in Baylor Advancement, and today I am joined by Jeremy Everett, who is the founder and the Executive Director of the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. Jeremy is also the author of a book. I was just telling him that I now have my copy of the book, I Was Hungry. I'll let him talk about that a little bit, but it's so far I have not completed it, Jeremy, but it's been a great read. But listen, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Ryan, thanks for highlighting the work of the collaborative and for all you're doing to keep spirits uplifted and help people understand all that Baylor is trying to do to address both our students, our faculty and staff, and also the world during this really unusual time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the same could be said for you and the work you guys are doing. And that's kind of where I wanted to start is just for the Baylor alumni, parents, families that we work with. For those that may not be as familiar, Jeremy, with the work that you and your team does, obviously you were the founder initially, I should have said, of the Texas Hunger Initiative that now has transformed and been rebranded into the collaborative. So maybe just a quick background on yourself and obviously some of the work and just kind of the look and feel of what it is that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, I've been doing hunger and poverty work now for over 20 years, and really most of that work was born out of experiences both living and working in economic development work prior to coming to Baylor and launching the Texas Hunger Initiative. We really operate with three core principles, and one is that you have to have proximity to the problem. You can't solve a social problem from a distance, so you really have to immerse yourself in that reality. So we have regional offices around the state that are living and working with communities that are both highly impoverished, but also organizations that are working to address those issues on a daily basis. And then the second thing is you have to know what research suggests. Oftentimes we have a lot of good, well-meaning intentions to address these particular issues, but sometimes the work that we do might do more harm than good. And so that's really why you need research and strong evaluations of your interventions to go alongside with that proximity, because you're more likely to know what actually can help really move the needle on hunger and poverty, both in the U.S. and around the world. And the third area is our faith perspective. We need to really own and understand what our faith tradition teaches us. Of course, Jesus says, "I was hungry and you gave me food," and that's one of his strict instructions for people who are followers of Christ there in Matthew 25. Of course, that's what my book is named for. So we feel privileged to be able to do the work that we do, but the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty is an outgrowth of our work with the Texas Hunger Initiative. All of our work that we had done for the first 10 years of THI's existence was trying to find scalable solutions, both so that we could end hunger in Texas, but also develop solutions that could translate to other states and even other nations. And so after working in about 25 states over the past 10 years, Baylor came to us and we decided together, hey, it was time to expand both the name and the vision of the work. And so that became the impetus for launching the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. We still keep the Texas Hunger Initiative. Now we just have rebranded that, and that's what we call our program that is Texas specific.
And I know that the truth is you could probably talk at great length about each aspect of that and all of honestly all the really cool things that you guys are doing. What I'm excited to dive into today a little bit, Jeremy, is with each of these videos we've looked at kind of the impact of the coronavirus and then kind of responses at Baylor University in various capacities. And for you guys, you had this really unique opportunity where you have been tasked with, and you're now partnering with corporations and with USDA to directly fight, if you will, the coronavirus and certainly the hunger that comes with that. So as a way to set the stage for the work that you're doing, obviously last summer you were able to put forth the, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of the first go round with a Meals to You program. So I wanted you to kind of, highlight what it was that you guys were able to put forth last year, the vision with that, and then kind of lead that into the opportunity that you've now been given as a major player in this fight against the coronavirus.
Yeah, well, our job is to be a research and innovation project at Baylor. And so we typically have about a dozen projects that we're doing a deep dive with at any given point. And so some of those projects are going to be domestic, some of them might be global projects. But this was a project that had kind of been born out of a decade worth of experience trying to address hunger both in Texas and around the country. What we found specifically for children when they were out of school during the summer is that's when childhood food insecurity skyrockets. And food insecurity is essentially the technical definition that we use in the anti-hunger community, which basically means that someone doesn't have enough food to live an active, healthy lifestyle. So they're missing meals. And so we see child hunger every summer skyrocket nationwide when kids get out of school because they don't have the school lunch program to be able to rely on or the school breakfast program. And so we've worked diligently over the past decade to try to create summer meal sites in partnership with USDA and in Texas, the Texas Department of Agriculture, and then school districts and nonprofits around the state. We now have 6,000 summer meal sites in Texas that serve about 12 to 14% of the population of kids that are on the free and reduced lunch program. So still only a fraction of the kids that need meals are getting access to meals, even though we have 6,000 summer meal sites now. So we tested out a couple of different intervention models. We tested out another one called what we call summer EBT. And that's where we put extra resources on WIC cards. The Women's, Infants, and Children's Program, they get these summer electronic benefits cards. And we tested that out in North Austin and El Paso. And that put extra resources on the card. So when kids got out of school, that particular family could go to the grocery store and they could purchase a little more food, recognizing that their oftentimes, their income wasn't going up during the summer, but their expenses were. That worked incredibly well, but only in urban areas where people had access to grocery stores. But people in rural Texas and rural America, they didn't have access to summer meal sites because oftentimes a kid might live 45 minutes one direction from a school or a summer meal site. So it's not feasible for their family to bring them daily to come get a sandwich at lunch.
Right.
And so we had to figure out, instead of getting the kids to the food, we had to figure out how we could get the food to the children in rural Texas. So we, in partnership with USDA, launched the Meals to You program last summer. We had 4,000 kids that were on our initial pilot, a little 10-week demonstration project. We served about 485,000 meals and snacks to those 4,000 kids over that 10-week period in partnership with McLean Global, who was our vendor for the program. And UPS was the one that was delivering the food and directly to people's doorsteps. It went incredibly well. We heard great feedback from the school districts and the families that were part of the program. And so USDA came back to us early this fall and said, can you expand the program? And so we thought, sure, we'd be happy to expand it. And so we discussed expanding it to New Mexico and to Alaska. Now, many of the communities that we were going to be serving in Alaska don't even have roads to get there. And so literally there's an island that was, it's going to be a part of the summer demonstration project that is as close to Russia as it is Alaska. I mean, it's just incredibly rural. And so they said, hey, can we expand there? And we decided, we could do that in partnership with the state of Alaska. And we were going to serve a total of 10,000 kids, including the kids in Texas, the kids in New Mexico, and the kids in Alaska. Well, as this year transitioned towards and the pandemic began to really look like it was going to be a full-blown pandemic, USDA came back to us and said, is this something, if schools begin to close, is this something that we could potentially partner with them on? And that really became the impetus that drove the conversation about what we call the Emergency Meals to You program.
And it was interesting. About a month ago, you were on Baylor Connections, which is a podcast that does great work for Baylor University. And one of the things you talked about with the Emergency Meals to You program was kind of the scalability, if you will, of a program like this, where, like you said, you were thinking you'd go from the 4,000 plus meals.
Yeah.
Now you're up to 10,000 students that you're potentially working with this year. Now we're talking about a much larger scale. So I'm just, now fast forward 5 or so weeks after you had that conversation on Baylor Connections. How has that looked? How's that going?
Well, I mean, I will say for our team, we have a very devoted, very sharp team, and across the spectrum. So we've got field staff who are working with us on this program. We've got, of course, got our administrative team and innovation team that offices here at Baylor that have been front and center. We've got researchers. We have 60 researchers that are part of our Research Fellows program. Half are Baylor faculty, half are faculty at other universities and think tanks and research centers. And it's taken all of us. It's taken all of us. I've joked that most of our staff have been working 26-hour days for the past 6 weeks or so. And so that little program that went from 4,000 kids to 10,000 kids, which if you look at our dozen programs that we're running at any given point, that's relatively small. But when USDA came back to us and they said, hey, can you expand this program to serve rural kids during the pandemic? We said, sure. And initially they said, how about 20,000 kids? We said, no problem. And but then they came back to us within probably a few hours and said, how about 100,000 kids? And then it grew to 115,000 and 135,000 kids. And as of today, we've announced that we're going to be serving 500,000 kids a day, 2 meals a day in 35 states plus Puerto Rico. So I think we've got hundreds and hundreds of school districts that we'll be partnering with over the next several months. We are ready. So the initial goal, once we went live, once we announced that we were going to partner with USDA in an official capacity, they did a big White House press conference about it. It was pretty neat. But they announced that our goal was going to be 1 million meals for essentially 100,000 kids a week. And we assumed that we would grow into that. That would probably take a month for us to grow into. And within the first week, we had more than 100,000 kids in the application process. So we've served 3.5 million kids in less than 3 weeks of service delivery. And that's a testament to a lot of people doing a lot of hard work. Our tech team built the internal capacity for our technical system that was set up to be able to onboard these applications. Was initially set up for 10,000 kids. And so having to scale that up to 100,000 kids. UPS having to, you think about some of the areas where we're sending tens of thousands of packages. That might be they might get more packages through this program in a week than that community might normally get in a year. And so even USDA, UPS is having to scale up, in these different regions. McLean Global and PepsiCo's Food for Good program have literally gone to 24-hour shifts, where they've got, or 24-hour cycle where they've got shifts coming in and to be able to meet the demand. So it's been neat to see the public and private sectors working as seamlessly as possible to be able to pull this thing off and to be able to expand it as quickly as the demand has requested. And that's been hard. That's been hard. You don't want any kid to go without food. And so we're grateful that we have a bunch of very bright, very compassionate people working to solve this problem.
It's incredible. As you say, the numbers, it's even more overwhelming than what I had seen and heard so far. I mean, that's really amazing. One thing I was going to ask you as well, Jeremy, while I have you, and again, this is Jeremy Everett, who is the founder and executive director of the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. I'm going to pitch your book one more time. I Was Hungry, title of his book. And as I read, again, I'm not through it, but early on reading you had a chapter where you talked about Hurricane Katrina as being a moment where a learning experience really for you. And I thought it was fascinating how you talked about it as a learning experience, but then you also paralleled it with kind of the disaster of hunger, and kind of the complexity of that. So I wanted to ask you, if this is kind of a fair way to ask it, is, now you're in a pandemic and you're working through a pandemic, the hunger disaster as a part of a pandemic. So what are you learning now, or what are you seeing now that it's kind of fascinating you, given your background?
Well, one of the things that I write about during Hurricane Katrina is that the response was as catastrophic as the actual event was in and of itself. We were completely unprepared as a nation to be able to deal with a disaster of that magnitude. Part of the problem was that in those kinds of situations, you've got to have the private sector, the grocery store operators, the bus companies, the helicopter companies, the airplane companies, all working in sync with the nonprofit sector. Faith communities were critical in addressing the need during that particular time. And then local, state, and federal government, the fire department, the police department, all have to be speaking the same language and on the same page and working from the same plan. And no one was. And so the result was people being stranded in New Orleans for weeks. One of the things I write about is that there was I operated a shelter on the south side of San Antonio during much of the response to Katrina once people were evacuated. And a number of the individuals that ended up in my shelter had been stranded on a bridge. And that bridge was something that was just played over and over again on the news cycle. And these individuals had climbed on top of the bridge, had walked through chest deep water to get there, and sat there on the bridge for a week before they could be evacuated. And so helicopters were airdropping water and crackers and a few things just to keep the people alive. But here they were, many of them were elderly. One of the women was in her mid-70s and broke her hip trying to get up onto that bridge and sat there for a week with a broken hip before being evacuated. By the time she got to San Antonio, our hospitals were full. And so she came into our shelter and we put her on the lone hospital bed that we had in a sea of Army cots in our shelter. And when she needed to use the restroom, 4 of us would have to pick up the 4 corners of her sheet and take her back and forth to the restroom before we could eventually get her to a hospital. Well, the situation is very similar. Our hospitals are overrun. Our systems and infrastructure are not communicating with each other, and so the result is that oftentimes our response might be as bad as the actual event that's happening. And so we've all seen, that communities aren't getting adequate testing. Maybe they're not getting adequate ventilators, or it's taken a long time for communities to be able to scale up accordingly. In the hunger space, one of the things that we've seen is that communities that were not used to collaborating, and we spend a lot of time over the past decade building hunger-free community coalitions. And in communities where those coalitions existed, you had the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, faith communities, school districts, city government, all around the table, and they knew each other and they met together, and they were always used to working to identify gaps that the community identified, and then developing strategic plans across those sectoral lines to address those gaps. And so in communities where that was happening, their response to the pandemic was quick. They were able to shift gears really quickly because they already had that established communication infrastructure, that established trust built between community organizations, and they knew how to work together. They knew how to operationalize a plan. In communities where that didn't exist, communities were having to come and get to know each other, figure out what resources were out there beyond their own organizational resources to begin to start the partnership process after this happened. And when that happens, you're delaying your capability by a minimum of 4 to 8 to 12 weeks to be able to respond on a very base level. these other communities are responding at a very high level in a very comprehensive capacity because they're used to working in a collaborative manner. So that's one of the things when we see those parallels from Hurricane Katrina, what we learned from Hurricane Katrina before hurricanes like Gustav and Ike, a lot of those hurricanes hit, and we had a more organized response. I think we're seeing a lot of parallels, and a lot of the infrastructure that we built to public and private infrastructure that we built to address disasters like hurricanes had not been developed to be addressed to address these kind of pandemic situations. So I think we know that we need it now, and so I'm hoping that we use this as a learning experience and build that before, just to help us survive normal times, much less these difficult situations.
It's amazing, really is. What are next steps now, Jeremy, for you? And that's probably not easy to kind of sum up, but I'm also interested, along with kind of the next steps, can you also speak to the best ways for people to, to help you out, to donate time or resources, funding, whatever it may be? How does someone watching this video help, and what those next steps look like?
There are a number of ways. So those are great questions. Next steps for us as an organization are expanding this program from 115 or 120,000 kids that are currently enrolled to somewhere around 500,000 kids. And so our team over the next 3 weeks will be just constantly enrolling children, working with our vendors to get food to families that are in difficult circumstances in rural America. After that, so the program will last through June 30th. Currently, they may come back. Congress and USDA would have to determine if they want to expand it throughout the entire summer. We're not sure what they'll do. DC is unpredictable to us, I think, as it is to anybody, and so we'll see what they determine to do. But our team is prepared to serve meals to kids through June 30th. What we learned from the recession is that it took 6 years for us to begin to see food insecurity levels or rates of hunger drop to pre-recession levels.
Wow.
So it shows that families that are economically disadvantaged, it takes them a lot longer to recover from these economic disruptions like the recession or certainly like the pandemic. So our team is already beginning to shift gears to think, okay, after we get through just this initial emergency response system, what do we need to be doing to be prepared to address this post-pandemic, crisis that is going to linger probably for 2 to 5 to even 10 years after this whole event. After we make it through this whole event, and we're not even sure when we're going to make it through this whole event, right? We're not sure if we really have turned the corner as a nation, or if we're going to see another spike. Is it going to come back in the fall or winter? But that's what our team is really looking at. For ways people can get involved, there are several ways. One, if they live in rural America, making sure that their school district knows that this is a resource available to them, and send them to our website, hungerandpoverty.org, and people can see how to get plugged into the Meals to You program through that website. Other ways are volunteering in the local community. If you're healthy and in good shape, the Meals on Wheels program is a program that has really been decimated by the lack of, they've lost a lot of their volunteers. A lot of their volunteers that are delivering meals to homes are the elderly. The elderly are delivering meals to the elderly, and which is a remarkable program. One of my favorite interventions nationwide is this Meals on Wheels program. But we really see that they need more volunteers, and so that's a way that they can get plugged in locally. They can also give. We've had a lot of generous Baylor alumni donate to the collaborative over the past month to really help us combat this particular issue. As you can imagine, it requires as many staff as we can pull together to be able to address this situation, and but also thinking about it after we get through the crisis. So how can Baylor alumni come and partner with us to help us address the food security, what's going to become a food security epidemic, both now and after the crisis. We're probably going to see food security rates almost double. So going from 40 million Americans, I think right now we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 80 million Americans that are having food disruption. So those are the ways families can get plugged in. They can build a hunger-free community coalition too in their community after this thing gets over, to make sure that their community is better prepared in the future.
Last thing, Jeremy, I know you're really busy. It's amazing the work you talk about and the number of hours your team puts in. I'm just curious, I saw about a week ago, this is just one of many examples. The Waco Independent School District gave you guys an award, the RISE Award, for the community, the community involvement and the difference you're making. And like I said, that's one of many. I've also seen, it's awesome to see news articles in Maine and in these other states where it's, Baylor's name, the Baylor Collaborative's on it because you're making an impact. So how much opportunity do you and the team have to reflect on some of these great successes?
That's a great question. I was thrilled for our local team, led by Craig Nash and Chelsea Strawn, who have worked tirelessly to get the curbside meal program up and going for Waco ISD, and in partnership with Waco ISD's nutrition program. So that was a real accomplishment. This is the kind of work that they do day in and day out with school districts, and that's one thing that honestly is probably left out of the news cycle right now, is that we're getting a lot of publicity around the Meals to You program, but the rest of our field staff are working with the other 12. We've got 50 school districts that are enrolled in our Meals to You program from Texas. But we got about 1,200 school districts that are serving curbside meal programs. Wow. that our field staff are working with in real time, and we've got a website where we're keeping all of the resources for kids in Texas updated, also kind of linked through the hungerandpoverty.org website. But so accolades for our field staff for the work that they do day in, day out is probably one of the proudest moments I think I have as the executive director. And I think, I'm just, in terms of reflection, we meet all the time, and we probably are able to reflect in 3-minute increments right now. And somebody will have a thought and they'll share it during one of our meetings, and we all might kind of pause for a second, but then we're hard charging on, to try to solve the next problem. So having said that, we will do what we call a postmortem after this is all over, and we'll all sit around together and talk about lessons learned. We'll reflect on the things that didn't go well that we want to improve. We'll also reflect on what went well and what it meant to us as individuals and as a team to be able to be a part of, hopefully, the solution, not just a part of the problem. So but it's been, I'll tell you, it's been meaningful, and that given that a lot of this happened, our first boxes went out on Easter Sunday, Easter weekend, and I thought that was one of the coolest Easter weekends I've ever been a part of, because that people, after losing jobs, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, to be able to receive a box of 20 meals for each of your kids in your household, that is experiencing death and resurrection in a very real, tangible way. And so that was very meaningful. And so I think we've experienced a lot of little deaths, a lot of small resurrections throughout this process. And so just grateful that we can, that we were able to be a part of it in such in as big a way as we could handle, that's for sure.
And the work you're doing is incredible. Those numbers are staggering. And Jeremy Everett, the executive director, also the founder of the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, I really, really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the invitation and what you're doing to tell the Baylor story.
We're going to continue producing and publishing these videos as we make our way through the pandemic, hopefully sooner rather than later. But continue to follow along as we highlight more stories like the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, where amazing things are happening in the Baylor community. I'm Ryan Boyd, signing off on another edition of the Advancement Interview Series.